I want to improve your situational awareness so you don't die. It's a pretty good goal, right? Or fall foul of some other lesser crime, but I think we can all get behind the not dying part. When it comes to paying attention to our environment, we need situational awareness. That is the skill that we should all be practicing. My name's Terry Vaughan. I serve with the British Royal Marine Commandos. When I got out of this elite unit, I had no idea what I was going to do with the rest of my life. And while I was waiting on some sort of professional epiphany, I taught a variety of combatives, or how to fight your way out of a bad situation. But a part of the curriculum always included how to avoid the fight, if possible, because that's the only fight you can ever guarantee winning. It's the one you're not there for when it kicks off. But what does it take to identify a dangerous individual or situation far enough in advance that you can beat feet, retreat, not be there by the time it kicks off? That is situational awareness, and it's comprised of three elements. We have mindset, strategy, and body language. Mindset is you knowing you first, how you process sensory information. But perhaps as important as anything is your willingness to embrace your own curiosity when it comes to scanning the environment and the people around you. Strategy pertains to your ability to scan the environment in a particular way so that you see more detail than ever before. It's also about you having a plan already in place so you know what to do if you see something threatening. It's one thing to see a threat coming. It's quite enough to know how you should respond, playing to your strengths so you can get out of there before it arrives. And then perhaps my favorite, body language, which is the outward manifestation of personality, attitude, and under the right circumstances, intent. But before we can begin improving any of your situational awareness skills, we have to acknowledge at least one thing, and that is that we do not multitask very well. We don't have the cognitive bandwidth to be immersed in our phones and scanning the environment. So even if we set aside a potential criminal coming after you, the environment sometimes can do a decent amount of damage as well. One of the hardest parts with becoming situationally aware is putting your phone down, separating yourself from the addictive sort of draw to use it, and immerse yourself in any given environment so that you can see what's going on around you. If you can take that first step of just separating from your phone when you're moving between locations, you can set yourself up at least halfway towards being successful in terms of situational awareness. Push the button too many times, I'll take it back. The first step to improving your mindset is to embrace your natural sense of curiosity, one of our very human traits. So with a show of hands, how many of you already enjoy people watching? Fantastic. Keep your hands up for just a moment. Take a look around the room. These are all the people who are going to check you out during the break. Keep your hand up a moment longer if you also enjoy being watched. There's always a few hands that go down a little slower than the rest. It raises an interesting dilemma, doesn't it? We want to be attentive, we want to look, we want to scan, we want to embrace that curiosity, but we have to be efficient in how we do it, because if not, we're going to freak everybody else out for staring too long at them within the environment. We also have to be efficient so that we can identify the most likely candidate for a threat, a problem personality, as soon as possible, because that's the person we need to avoid like the plague. Now, we see much less of our environment in high definition or foveal vision than you might think. The total amount of foveal vision or high definition vision that we see is around 1.8 degrees field of view. Now, for most people, that doesn't mean very much. It's hard to conceptualize what does 1.8 degrees actually feel like when our vision feels so expansive. So if you'll extend your arm out in front of you for just a moment with your thumb up and focus your visual attention on your thumbnail, depending on how athletic your thumb is, how girthy, that is around 1 to 1.5 degrees field of view. While you are focused on your thumbnail, everything else that you see is peripheral vision and makes you legally blind. Even if you bring the other thumb up in close proximity to it, you can see it. We're very adept at picking up on movement, shapes, colors, etc. But the reality is you've got to transition your eyes across to the other thumb and pick between which one to see it in any detail. This is an important element of scanning the environment that we need to be aware of. When you are out and about and embracing your natural curiosity to look at people and figure out what they're all about through their nonverbals, you're going to be drawn to look at faces, you're going to be drawn to look at their eyes and see where they're looking. What I want you to do is to add a conscious decision to move from their faces and their eyes down to their hands. We need to know what they're holding. 99% of the time, it's going to be completely harmless. It'll be a cell phone or something else innocuous. But on the one time it's something threatening, we need to know what it is. Because if somebody intends you harm, unless they're going to jump on your back like a spider monkey and start munching on the back of your neck, they're going to use their hands to achieve that objective. And it's quite likely they're going to bring a tool to help them facilitate the crime. We need to know what it is so that we can immediately bug out, create distance between ourselves and them. But we have to make that conscious decision. Our foveal vision is not good enough to look at faces and know what someone has in their hands. The next strategy pertains to eye movement. We move our eyes on average 2 to 3 times per second. Each movement of the eyes is known as a saccade. When we scan the environment and we look at people, every place that we stop, whether it's people or shiny objects, it's known as a fixation. Between fixations, our brain suppresses incoming visual data to make sure that we have a fairly smooth viewing experience. The way to overcome this suppression, known as saccadic suppression, is to scan every environment that you go into twice. So as you move your eyes around the environment, assuming you find nothing nefarious the first time, scan it again, but look past, beyond, through, around to the best of your ability, those original points of fixation, so that you take in more detail from your environment than you have before. If you take a look at the screen behind me at the 2 red dots, move your eyes between them just 5 or 6 times. In addition to saccadic suppression, what often happens after we've moved our eyes a few times between these points of fixation is we begin to blink. Moisten the eyes, make sure they're ready to do the job when they arrive at the next point of fixation. Between saccadic suppression and blinking, we are literally blind, which is why that second scan is so important. Not only does it give us vast amounts more of information, but to anyone that might be targeting you for a crime, they see someone that is actively scanning the environment. And in terms of nonverbal signals, someone that is alert and in tune and scanning their environment makes a much harder target. Imagine for a minute there's somebody 20 steps behind you, completely engrossed in their phone. You're ahead of them, you're scanning avidly, you've done at least 2 scans. You look like an individual ready to break out the crane as a defensive move at any minute. Don't ever break out the defensive move as a crane. But you are scanning, and right behind you is somebody immersed on their phone, inattentionally blind to everything that's going on around them. Who's the target? It's not going to be you. That's too difficult to get close. That second scan will provide you with more information, but it also gives the impression correctly that you are in tune and alert to what's going on around you. The last thing I want you to adopt in terms of strategy for viewing your environment is to look for the first time that you scan from right to left and low to high, or close to far. The reason you should do this is because for those of us who read left to right and top to bottom, we often take some of that scanning habit and apply it to the environment. It makes us complacent when we scan. Many of you, when you began looking between the 2 red dots, scanned from the top to the bottom. It's a habit we need to shake up. It's the complacency we're trying to stay clear of, because when we're complacent, we're a little bit too relaxed about how we scan. And going from right to left and low to high, it breaks that up, gives you a much better chance of pinging something that perhaps is out of place. Now, when it comes to looking for particular signals, one of the things I advise is to look for personality traits or characteristics that indicate arrogance. Arrogance is very close to entitlement, and somebody may feel entitled to you or your stuff. Now, I can't think of a better example of a time when I saw a whole bunch of very suspicious body language behavior than when I was on a train heading downtown Atlanta, not too long after immigrating into the US. I had chosen a seat on the side of this carriage that allowed me to see the majority of the train, especially the coming and going. And 2 stops after the one I got on, 2 young fellas got on, early 20s, and the larger of the 2 dudes gave me a little bit of the stink eye. That's not a technical nonverbal term, but it's just the eye contact was a little bit too long. In most environments, most of the time, eye contact between strangers is minimal. Some of you have avoided my eye contact today like the plague. We don't like to engage unless there's a reason for us to want to socialize. So eye contact is usually a second or less, maybe a little over a second, but in most cases it's short. His eye contact with me was in excess of 2.5 seconds. That's a long time. In addition, his blink rate reduced, which made it a little bit of a hard stare. To add insult to injury, the first signal that he gave me looked a lot like this. Now, this exposing of the throat is a signal that we often reserve for our friends or people that we know, like, and trust. It says, "I'm excited to see you." Often there's a smile that accompanies it. The eyebrows go up. It's all positive. Between strangers, not so much, because it gives the indication that I feel in this moment, and when I say I meant him, so tough in that moment that even exposing the throat, he couldn't be hurt. On top of everything else, when he sat down in the seat opposite to me, he gave me the most egregious man spread I've ever seen. This would have made a stripper blush. It was awful. On top of that, after he sat down, I got contempt, which is an asymmetrical compression at the corner of the mouth that indicates superiority. Scorn. I don't know where all this was coming from. I hadn't looked at him for that long, but somehow I'd really upset this dude. I did my best to avoid any more eye contact with him by moving and looking over his head, over his shoulder, anywhere but direct eye contact, but I kept my peripheral vision tuned in for movement. And it didn't take long before he started nudging his friend, and that drew my attention back in, where I found them both staring at my boots, which I was surprised at too, because they were not a fashion statement. They were thick boots, heavy leather, ready for the apocalypse, just the way I like them. My confusion only lasted a moment before I remembered there'd been the spate of crime du jour all over the US in various cities where people were getting mugged for their footwear. And these two had given a nice cluster of signals that all led me to think they were fairly arrogant, and maybe I was a good candidate for a robbery. And unless I wanted to spend the rest of the day in my socks, I needed to do something about this and put them off. So imagine for a moment, pun intended, you are sitting on the train in my shoes and you've been targeted for a robbery. What do you think you would do? Most of the time, the suggestions that I hear include move carriages, seek help, which initially sounds great because at least that creates distance between you and the potential robbers. But the reality is if they've chosen to rob you and they follow you to the next carriage, you've got the same problem. You've just changed geographical location for the robbery. Maybe it'll be nicer if I'm robbed over there. You haven't changed anything. You haven't put them off. Seek help. That can be problematic. The bystander effect and people being reluctant, nay, absolutely not wanting to get involved with helping a stranger, is prevalent pretty much everywhere. So if you're seeking someone to come to your aid, don't count on it. If it happens, that would be lovely. But the chances are it won't. Another suggestion is often engage them in conversation. What happens to our vocal cords when we get a little nervous? They get a little tight, a little pitchy. So now when you open your mouth to say something confident like, "Hey fellas, I see you're in the market for some used shoes." Instead of it coming out the way you like, it's, "Hey fellas, how's it going?" And all you've served to do is absolutely guarantee they steal your shoes. Coming up with a plan in the moment is difficult because we don't traditionally think well under pressure. Our brain doesn't like thinking under pressure. So having a plan in advance is always beneficial. It's always helpful. I had an idea about what I might do if I was ever targeted for a crime. I didn't think I'd ever use it, but here we were nonetheless. So allow me to share. I'm sitting on this seat and I start to rock forwards and backwards. Now, at first, it may have looked like I just had found a really cool beat and I was singing it in my own head. But there was no smiling and no finger clicking. There was just rocking backwards and forwards. And I contracted a little bit of the muscle underneath the eye. It's orbicularis oculi, goes all the way around. This contracted to give a little anger. But then I widened the eyes a little bit too, to give a little bit more sclera, so it looked a little rage-like as well. And to the rocking and the rage, I added the following. And they did much the same thing you guys just did. I immediately had their undivided attention. And their nonverbal signals nearly immediately changed. The malicious man spread shrunk immediately. They were taking up significantly less room. There was a small gestural retreat into the seat. They were putting distance between the two of us. I can't imagine why. Ventral orientation, the midline of the body, which was confrontational up till now, directly aligned, bladed. And they looked at one another and did this. They had reached the conclusion that I was not a good candidate for shoe donation. It was like, no, we're not doing it. But I kept up the rocking and the barking, and I would stop every once in a while and listen to the voices in my head and laugh and then stop the laughing. I mean, it just kept going until we got to the next station. I was rocking so enthusiastically at one point, I was nearly coming out of my seat, and every time I did, they'd back up. When we got to the next station and the doors opened, these two were gone like greyhounds at the slip. And I kept it up until the doors closed because I didn't want to get them back on when they found out this was faked. But as soon as those doors closed, I just slumped because I was exhausted. And then I saw a little old lady sitting across the train looking at this, wagging her finger and laughing because she'd seen this entire charade and she knew I'd faked it. It's really hard to intimidate crazy. Give me a boot. I want you, dude, sorry mate, can't hear you above the barking. It's very hard to intimidate crazy. And I'm not saying that at the outset of a potential robbery, you immediately break out like a German Shepherd. Although I'm not saying don't. It worked for me. But have a plan already ready to go because in the moment, it can be really hard to come up with something practical that gets you out of that situation. It's much easier if you've already pre-planned all of the, basically the shortfalls of your story in advance rather than waiting for the moment. When you're out in the environment, embrace your curiosity. Scan diligently. Leave your cell phone in your pocket. Scan the hands. What are they holding? We need to know. If it's something bad, we want to know as soon as humanly possible. Scan twice. Look beyond, past those fixation points, so you're taking more of your environment than ever before, but it also gives the impression to anyone that's watching that you're a hard target because you're alert to what's going on around you. Look for the nonverbal signals that may indicate attitude, intention. You may only get a few, but if you get a good cluster of signals all related to one another, you can trust the cluster. Respond accordingly. Go out there, keep your heads on a swivel, and stay safe. Cheers.